Hello, everybody, and welcome to True Crime Banter, the podcast aimed at bringing you your dose of murder relaxation. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Well.
Hi.
Here we are, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and I don't know if all of you were doing the same finger guns that Christian was just doing to the OG intro, but
I missed it.
I know, we might, who knows? Who knows what's going to go on with these intros nowadays? Who knows what's going to go on with these episodes nowadays, right? But that's the beauty of True Crime Banter.
Yeah, true.
You just never
the beauty, quote unquote
really,
beauty.
yeah, you never really know what the hell you're going to get. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the True Crime Banter podcast. No banter for today. No games for today. We're just going to get into hard-hitting news, which is old news, but it's always news. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the case of Gemma McCluskie.
It was a typical Tuesday back in early March of 2012. Or at least it started off as one. A woman was sailing her barge down the canal in London, UK, and she stopped at Acton Lock, where she waited for the water levels to start to shift, as they always did. But while she was waiting, she felt something hit the side of the boat, and when she looked down, she saw a suitcase. Call it fate or whatever, but the boat must have hit the suitcase just right, because it popped open on impact, revealing the last thing anyone would expect, the torso of a female. Cops swiftly arrived on scene, and once the suitcase was out of the water, police got a closer look, but the only identifier on the torso was a tattoo of a bow on the lower back. For the moment, that's all police had to go off of. A little ways away, a family was urgently searching for their loved one. Gemma lived with her mother, Pauline, and one of her two brothers, Tony, in a flat not too far away. Her other brother, Danny, lived nearby, and him and Gemma were very close and spoke often. Their mother had recently become unwell after the removal of a brain tumor that had sadly led to a MRSA infection, and Gemma took care of her almost full time. Those who knew Gemma all said the same great things. She was little but had a big personality. She was only 4'11", but had a fiery side and just as equal a loving side. Being so down to earth and welcoming, if you met her, you might not suspect that once she had a leading role on a popular soap opera in the UK called EastEnders. She was in over 30 episodes, leaving the show back in 2001. After her acting career slowed down, she took a break and bartended at a few pubs near her home. Once again, all her coworkers and patrons said the same thing. She was fiery and loud, in a good way, and life of the party. Nobody knew what happened, but it didn't look good. This was tricky, though, because she was so well-liked that they couldn't even drum up any possible enemies that would want to cause her harm, so they had really no idea where to even start.
When police got a hold of the case, they traced her last days and movements the best they could, put together with the help of friends and electronic data. Investigators were able to see that on February 29th, she attended an event in Whitechapel. her friend was putting on a performance and she volunteered to come and film it for them. The next day, March 1st, she had visited a friend nearby, but it wasn't until a couple of days later that a friend of Gemma's named Carly got a message on Facebook. It wasn't from Gemma, though. It was from a mutual friend asking if Carly had seen or heard from Gemma. This mutual friend was worried and told Carly that Gemma was missing. The pros of a big friend circle is that many people notice when a character like Gemma doesn't respond for days, and this had everybody worried. At the time she went missing, she was currently employed at a club on Kingsland Road, and her brother Danny headed down there to see if he could find anyone who might know where she is or if she had mentioned if she was going anywhere. At this point, he was desperate, hoping someone knew something, anything. But unfortunately, they all said the same thing as her friends. They hadn't seen her or heard from her. She hadn't shown up for a shift at work, and even if she had bailed, she would have never bailed on her mother who was sick. Like we said before, Gemma was her full-time caregiver, and she took this job very serious. She would never leave her mom stranded like this. Finally, on March 3rd, her two brothers and a friend of Gemma's all went down to the police station to report her missing. Since her brother Tony was the last one to see her, his accounts of her movements would be crucial, so police needed to speak with him immediately. As they sat down with him and the interview began, things started to look a little funny right away. Tony gave 3 different stories and said he couldn't remember the last time he saw her. This not only frustrated police, but Danny, who was going crazy with worry and anxiety.
Now, Tony and Danny were very different. Danny was a little more straight edge, and Tony had a really long and twisted history with drug abuse. Tony tells police that his reason for giving conflicting stories was that his brain was pretty much fried from years of substance abuse. Police close to Gemma knew that her and her brother Tony had a strained relationship, so Danny came straight out and asked him if him and Gemma had a fight when he last saw her. He somehow suddenly remembered that they did have a fight just before she disappeared. Apparently, Tony had been so high that day that he had left the bathtub faucet on and had fallen asleep. So Gemma came home to a flooded apartment that day and was furious at Tony, and a big fight ensued. Afterwards, Gemma had seen a friend and vented that she was finished with Tony and his lack of respect and responsibility, and she was going to kick him out. Her friend urged her to give him one more chance, but Gemma had apparently made up her mind. Tony said that after they got into this fight, he went to his room to calm down, and when he came back downstairs hours later, he found Gemma's keys on the table, but she was nowhere in sight, he swears. Friends and family couldn't just sit around and do nothing, though, so one of her friends contacted a local newspaper, and a reporter there recognized Gemma's name from the TV show that she had been on. So she decided to interview Gemma's 2 brothers, and noticed that while Danny was clearly distressed and heartbroken, Tony seemed much more calm and not as worried. March 5th rolled around, and searches of all kinds were out in full force. Friends even circulated the hashtag #FindGemma, in hopes that this would spark up a tip or a lead. Friends also passed out missing posters, and the word spread quickly, but shortly after the searches began, Tony was at home with friends and family when he started receiving a number of very strange phone calls. The first phone call said, "If you want to see Gemma alive, £2 million needs to be taken to Benfleet International Station." A second call demanded $500 worth of Iraqi dinar. And on the third call, the mystery caller just reiterated the first call about the £2 million. When Tony demanded to speak to his sister, the caller said she had been, quote, stripped of her clothes, locked in a room, and was being sexually assaulted, end quote. Gemma's older brother Danny got the exact same calls. People didn't know what to think. Was this real? Should they take this seriously? Or was this some kind of fucked up joke by some weirdo that was taunting them? While the phone calls appeared to be by an unknown number, police were able to trace them to a 19-year-old kid named Sam Ken, and shortly after getting his address, they raided his home and arrested him. And I'm sure everyone hoped this would be the final chapter of the story and that they would find Gemma, bring her home, but unfortunately this was exactly what some people were thinking, just a fucked up joke. His excuse was that he had been with a bunch of friends playing prank calls on people, and while he hadn't been the one to dial the number, he had joined in with his friends during the call. But Gemma's family said that when they got the calls, that only one voice appeared on there. He eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 months in jail. This put everyone back at square one. But while Danny was out and searching every day for his sister, people couldn't help but notice that Tony was staying home. His reason, when asked, was that he wanted to be there if Gemma came home. Cops were really noticing the difference between the two brothers, and while they can't arrest anyone for how they behave, they definitely took note of this. Tony didn't help his image when he spent all of his time inside and only joined the searches when he got wind that an international newspaper was doing a story on Gemma. Everyone noticed this. As the days went on, more stories were coming to light about the tension between Tony and Gemma. She had confided in a friend that Tony had become addicted to a powerful strain of weed called skunk. Now, I had no idea what this was, so I had to look it up. And it's basically just a stronger weed than normal. It has more of the psychoactive parts of weed in it. It can increase paranoia and even give you auditory and visual hallucinations. Both Gemma and her mother had contacted police before about Tony's behavior. Since taking skunk, he had become increasingly more violent. Police even find out that he had attempted to strangle Gemma twice.
They had the electronic data from all their family members and friends, and using this, they were able to piece together a timeline from Gemma's last day seen. Gemma had left her friend's house at 1:17 p.m. after having that talk about kicking out Tony. Phone records show 2 calls between her and Tony after she left their friend's house. The first call failed to connect, and then at 1:47, the pair finally connected, but it looks like it only connected for about 8 seconds. At 1:50, security footage from near her home shows her getting home. Less than 20 minutes later, Gemma's phone was switched off. Police questioned Tony a few more times, but for whatever reason, he refused or just couldn't answer some of these questions they had, being of no help to police. There was just absolutely no urgency on Tony's end. Only a day later, the news broke that a woman's torso had been found in a suitcase in the canal. And this is when D.I. Nicholson was tasked with letting Gemma's family know the grim news. Authorities believed it to be Gemma, but told the family to prepare for the worst while the DNA was being tested. Sadly, only a short while later, it was confirmed to be Gemma, and everyone she knew was shattered. Danny was given the heartbreaking task of telling their sick mother, who had just had surgery and was unable to speak. He said she just kept mouthing the word no over and over again. They must have had enough, because the day after the body was found, Gemma's brother Tony was arrested on suspicion of murder. When brought in and interviewed, his only response to every single question was no comment. Of course, this made him look even worse. A look at his text showed that while he was visiting his mother in the hospital the morning after she disappeared, he had sent a text to Gemma's phone saying, "Love ya, kiss kiss." They combed all their other interactions, though, and he had never once before told her that he loved her. To them, it looked like part of his cover-up was to look like he cared. The following day, he sent another text stating, "Gem, ring me when you get this message. What are you having for dinner? Are you working tonight? Kiss, kiss." While Tony was in custody, a tip came in that changed the game. A taxi driver had recognized Tony from TV and said that the evening Gemma went missing, he had given Tony a ride, but he told the driver his name was Tom. Security footage from the pickup site shows Tony lugging a heavy suitcase and putting it in the taxi's trunk. When the driver asked him what was inside, he said, "A sound system," and asked to be dropped off at a street by the canal. A student was on her apartment balcony that evening, and she also noticed a guy dragging a bag down by the water. This was backed up by more security footage from that same area. And when police asked to test the taxi driver's trunk, lo and behold, it tested positive for Gemma's blood.
On March 10th, Tony was officially charged with Gemma's murder. As he sat in jail, the forensic team was going through every inch of the apartment Gemma and Tony shared with their mom, and they found a lot of blood drops in the bathroom. But they were a little puzzled because, as you can imagine, a dismemberment would produce a lot of blood, and they didn't find nearly as much as they thought they would, not even in the drains as they thought. But they did find a small piece of human matter that came from inside Gemma's body, inside the cabinet in the bathroom. Police think that Tony most likely put down a tarp or some type of material that caught most of the mess, because it would be nearly impossible to leave as little of evidence behind as he did. He was caught on security footage the day after her murder, buying garbage bags, a newspaper, and cigarettes. Over the next few weeks, Gemma's legs were found inside garbage bags at the bottom of the canal where her torso was found, and the bags matched. Her arms were also found a little later as well in the same canal. Eventually, her head was found by someone cleaning the canal, and when forensics got a chance to examine her, it showed that she had massive signs of lacerations and deep head wounds. They suspect that she had died from a massive brain bleed. Gemma, Tony, and Danny's father, Anthony, was shown the footage from the night he got a taxi, showing Tony lugging the suitcase into the trunk, and Anthony confirmed that that was his son. When he got a moment to speak to Tony, Tony told him his version, stating, Gemma had come home that evening, mad and combative about the faucet being left on. She had told him that she was going to kick him out. He said he went upstairs, and when he came back down, she was standing there with a knife. He claims he doesn't remember what happened after that. Police theorize that for the 2 to 3 hours after she had died, Tony had used a knife and a meat cleaver to dismember her into 6 pieces. 2 months later, after all her body parts had finally been found and collected, family and friends of Gemma were finally able to gather and lay her to rest with a proper ceremony. And 2 months after that, the trial officially began of Tony McCluskie. During the course of the trial, details and photos were shown that laid out the terrible acts that he had inflicted on his sister. At one point, their father, Anthony, had to leave the courtroom. It was just too much for him. When it was Tony's time for the stand, his statement was, quote, I turned around and she was standing there with a knife in her hand. I got very angry. I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. All I remember is grabbing her wrist, and after that I have no recollection. End quote. During the trial, stories came out from friends, and stories unraveled that many didn't know. For years, Tony had been mentally and physically abusing Gemma. She would show up to events with bruises on her arms and wear sunglasses when she got a black eye from him. The relationship had been strained for quite some time, and it appears that this fight was the last straw. It took only 2 weeks for the jury to find Tony guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of a term of 20 years.
First of all, I'd like to say that my other son Danny could not make it here today because he's taken ill with the flu. This has been an extremely traumatic year for myself, my wife Carol, my son Danny and his partner Chantel, Gemma's extended family and all their many friends. We would sincerely like to thank Lead Detective John Nicholson, Dave Suddick and the Metropolitan Police and British Waterway units involved in a search for Gemma. Our thanks to Martin Worswick, our family liaison officer, and Miss Carly Sneed of the Victim Support Homicide team for their support in every step of the way. Through such a difficult time, grateful thanks to Chris Benale at QC and his team for their diligence and dedication. To some of her friends, Gem was known as Gem Star or Little Gem. Small in stature, she was huge in personality with a zest for life. Gemma was a daughter, a sister, an auntie, a cousin and a niece, and is very much loved and greatly missed. I would also like to thank the media for allowing us privacy through this very trying time. And I'd just like to say, good night, God bless Gemma. We all miss you and love you. Thank you.